Hello, welcome to the show. I am so excited. I have a very special guest today. Matt Hamilton is joining me to talk about tokenization and XRP and valuations. Welcome, Matt. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Hello, and thank you for having me on.
And if you are on Twitter at all, you may have noticed in the past couple of weeks, Matt and I have had a bit of a feisty exchange going back and forth, digging deep into a cool project that I'm part of around valuing XRP. And so we're here to talk about some things related to that and then some broader topics around tokenization. But before we get into that, Matt, I would love for you to just kind of catch us all up on your story. Like, how'd you get into tech? Why blockchain? Why XRP Ledger? What's the deal?
Sure. So I've been in tech since, kind of a kid, and then went into university and did computer science in the UK, University of Bristol.
Okay.
And then left and started a web development company with a couple of friends.
Okay.
And we built that up and did hosting as well. We had a data center that we ran in the UK. This was the early 2000s.
Okay.
And we were kind of like one of the main, the first kind of digital agencies in Bristol, kind of building intranets, mainly intranets, portals, that kind of thing, transactional websites, not sort of brochureware, not branding stuff so much, things for local councils, corporates, that sort of thing.
Cool.
And kind of, I fell into crypto kind of by accident. So I sort of found, when Bitcoin came out, I kind of looked at it. Actually, I thought nothing much of it. I thought, well, that's interesting, but it's never going to catch on, which was probably first big mistake. But I even think I mined a little bit at the start, back in the early days, and I've searched back to try and find, but I can't find any old wallets or anything.
Okay.
But one of the guys who worked for me in the web development firm, as we ran a data center, he started mining Bitcoin in it. And as a thank you at the end, when we, finally, when we wound the company down about 16 years or so later, he'd sold a bunch of his Bitcoin for XRP. This was early 2017, I think it was.
Okay.
And he gave me some of this XRP and he said, this is just a present for letting me mine Bitcoin in the office. Thanks very much. It's not worth much. One day it might be enough to put a down payment on a car. Here you go. Right. And by this point, I was working for a startup based in Los Angeles that was a health, nutrition, fitness tracking app that was being developed by a woman based in opposite UCLA. And I was in charge of the mobile development team, kind of building that. We're building that over about 3 years. It was privately funded by her. And then one Thanksgiving, she kind of pulled the plug and said, sorry, no more money, all stop. And I was like, okay, now what do I do?
Ooh.
So I wanted to kind of brush up on some of my coding skills, because I'd spent 3 years working in mobile web development, and then wanted to get, I was thinking I might end up back in the web side of things. And I thought I'd finally bury the hatchet with JavaScript that I'd kind of stayed away from most of the time. And I remembered this XRP and I thought, oh, okay, well, I wonder what this is about. And I wanted to learn a particular style of programming called async programming, or promise-based programming, React programming. And I found the original Ripple lib library and I started kind of writing something. I was like, oh, well, I wonder if I could programmatically trade this. I knew nothing about trading, nothing about cryptocurrencies, nothing beyond the theoretical about blockchain. And I started as a programming exercise just to brush up some skills. Can I use this to do some trading? And lo and behold, by the kind of end of day 2 or so, it was actually starting to make money. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. And so that kind of started me down the rabbit hole of finding out a lot more about cryptocurrencies and about blockchain. I kind of expanded that as a market maker on the XRP ledger, mainly trading US dollars, euros, Japanese yen, Chinese yuan, Bitcoin, Ethereum on the DEX, on the decentralized exchange that's built into the XRP ledger. And so that was running. That earned itself enough money for me to go and do a fintech diploma at the University of Oxford. The bot paid for that. So I was like, okay, that's quite a nice kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, well, this is great. I can just leave this bot making money and I don't need another job, right? This was by now about the end of 2017, start of 2018. XRP price had been going up. The whole market was going crazy. I was like, hey, this is easy street. I can just sit back and do nothing. My wife actually said, no, you've got to go and get a proper job because otherwise you'll just be sat on the sofa in your underpants and annoying the hell out of me. So, and then the market all came crashing down anyway. And so I was like, okay, so yes, I do need to go and get a proper job. And I got a job at IBM, which is about as proper job as you could get, right? So I was at IBM for 3 years and working initially on their cloud-based database hosting stuff.
Okay.
And then in the last year, I was a developer advocate for their machine learning and IBM Cloud software. So I was doing a lot of stuff with machine learning.
Okay.
And all this time, I've been still interested in XRP, still interested in blockchain, and this idea about algorithmic trading. I did a few talks at local Python groups about creating algorithmic trading stuff. I used various machine learning models to try to develop machine learning models to try and predict pricing and all this kind of stuff, and didn't particularly work out, but it was interesting and fun kind of learning. And then a role came up at Ripple when Warren Paul Anderson, who was in charge of Spring at Ripple, left. They were looking for somebody to take over as director of developer relations. So this was about this was end of 2020, and I started in 2021, February 2021, with Ripple as their director of developer relations.
And is that a developer role, or are you liaisoning? What does that mean, developer relations?
So developer relations is kind of a link between the developer community and the company, right? So the idea being is that you help developers build stuff by educating them, learning how the technology works, helping them understand the technology. You get involved with things like hackathons, coding competitions, things like funding rounds, grant funding, that sort of thing, and helping inform the company as well what's going on in the ecosystem, right? So you're kind of the pulse of what's going on in the ecosystem and the developers, and helping the company find out. Now, it's kind of very strange doing this for the XRP ledger because it's open and decentralized. You don't know who's using it, right? There's no way to know that somebody is using the XRP ledger until they come and tell you, right? You might be able to infer something by looking at the network, but it's not like, when I was at IBM Cloud, the main kind of KPI, the main metric I was measured on was how many signups do we have to IBM Cloud, right? And ultimately, how many go from a free tier to a paid tier. And so that was kind of the metric that I was measured on. Whereas with something like an open blockchain, there's no API key. You have to get anybody can build on it. So it's very difficult to find out who is actually building on it. So it's all about kind of very much soft skills, building relationships. I went along to a number of events and was talking to developers. I ran a live Twitch stream once a week for about a year, getting developers on to come and showcase what they were building, walking through code, examples, that kind of thing.
Are developers pretty open, that like they collaborate with each other, ask each other questions so that you didn't have to sort of try to figure out who's building?
Yeah, they were. I mean, what was amazing was actually whilst I was doing the live Twitch streams, there would be people asking questions in the chat as we were talking, and other people then started to come and answer those questions, before I got to them even, right? So before, I got a chance to kind of say them out loud, somebody had responded in the chat. So that was pretty cool. And then we launched, while I was there at Ripple, launched the XRP Ledger Grants program. So is now in, I think, about the fourth round of grants, I think.
Is the idea that Ripple has a vested interest in the XRP ledger succeeding, so they're just sort of helping to raise rising tide lifts all ships kind of idea?
Exactly. So Ripple split into two divisions, RippleNet and RippleX. RippleNet works on the traditional banking side of things, and the RippleNet network, which is a totally separate network to the XRP ledger. So RippleNet is a closed, permissioned, proprietary network that is used by Ripple clients to communicate with each other, and works within a regulated environment within the financial industry. And the XRP ledger is open, decentralized, permissionless, is existing within an uncertain regulatory environment. And I was on the RippleX side, so I was dealing with the XRP ledger specifically.
Are they like separate companies, like different offices, different teams, or is there?
They're not separate companies. There's separate business units within the company, and there was some crossover between them. And so there was some, there was some common functions that would support both sides, some of the, the marketing and comms side, for example. But at the time I was there, I think there was probably about 2/3 of the headcount were RippleNet, and probably about 1/3 was RippleX.
And what's RippleX's business model? Like, how do they make money?
Good question. RippleX didn't really have a business model. RippleX was all about just getting adoption for the XRP ledger. So I guess ultimately, at the end of the day, Ripple hold a large amount of XRP. If that goes up in value, that's good for the company, right? So if you have more developers building, then that's advantageous. And helping other developers build was part of what they were trying to do. So it was kind of a strange thing, especially when I literally signed my contract the day the SEC lawsuit hit. Right. So I actually had up on the screen the SEC lawsuit and my employment contract, and I was reading through both of them, and I'm like, this is either going to be the smartest or the stupidest move I've made. And I decided to go for it, and it was great. It was great working at Ripple and working with some fantastic people, and finally, kind of getting to do kind of in my day job and be paid to do what I've been doing a lot of, in my free time. Right. So
now, was the lawsuit a cloud over like the culture there, or did people just not care?
It was, I think it was a strange one. I think a lot of people, so the interesting thing within Ripple is that because like I said, about 2/3 were involved in RippleNet, and you had all the, the ancillary functions, recruitment, marketing, comms, et cetera. A lot of them didn't have that deeper knowledge of XRP or the XRP ledger. There was a core team. There's the people like sort of David Schwartz, Nick Bogalis, and the whole C++ team that worked on RippleD under Nick Bogalis, who very much understood how the XRP ledger worked, and people like Elliot Lee, and then just before I left, Abner Pinto that joined as well. Kind of people like that were very much involved, understanding the XRP ledger, but it was slightly surprising the number of times I had to explain it, even within Ripple, right? So, and it's difficult, right? Because the XRP ledger is decentralized, because you have no ultimate control. So, a good example is XLS20, the NFT amendment that happened. For people that don't know, amendments, changes to the protocol and new features come out as amendments on the network, and they have to be voted on by the validators, and they have to have 80% support for 2 weeks in order to be ratified. And we'd have kind of project managers within Ripple who were working on some of the code and working on some of the relationships with big brands about NFTs, saying, we're going to launch this on the 1st of November. And I'm kind of turning around saying, well, that's not your decision to make. Right, that's up to the network whether the participants vote on it, and you've got about, at the time, 5% vote. So you've got to ensure that everybody else on the network is enthused about this. And so it was a little bit of a interesting kind of culture between, I think, those that really fully understood, Web3, decentralized network, cryptocurrencies, and those that came from the more traditional corporate background and came from traditional finance and whatever. I think there was a bit of a kind of sometimes difference between how they approach things that could do with being better, perhaps, shall we say.
Sort of a little bit like team banking, team tech, and kind of squabbling over the vision of the company? Or what do you think they disagreed on?
It's not so much that they disagreed. It's just they were both involved in what they were doing, right? So even in team banking within RippleNet, you had a whole technical division, right? RippleNet is a software product that is built by Ripple, and licensed to financial institutions to use. But they're very much like any other corporate, like enterprise software business. They could be selling databases or CRM software or whatever, ERP software. And it would be pretty much the same kind of structure. You got an engineering team, you got a sales team, you got management, you got et cetera, kind of all working around that. And then RippleX was this wild bunch within there that were working in this strange crypto stuff, right? So it was a kind of a slightly strange feeling there, I think, at times in this kind of duality within the company.
Did they ever bring developers like you over to the RippleNet side to sell into the banking world, or was it kind of kept separate?
Not so much to sell into the banking world. I mean, where it started to kind of cross over were things like ODL, so Ripple's on-demand liquidity product, right? That allowed RippleNet to access liquidity from the XRP ledger. So that was kind of where the two sides kind of met. And also some of the products that they were working on, like Liquidity Hub, for example, in which was a system to allow any regular company to buy cryptocurrencies very easily through a single, like, one-stop shop, right? So they could just say, we want to buy X amount of Bitcoin or Ethereum or XRP, and they could buy it, straight off through this Liquidity Hub without needing to go to individual, exchanges and do the KYC themselves and all that kind of stuff. So, there were some kind of areas where the two sides met. I think they're kind of merging closer and closer together now. I think there was a necessity for them to be separate in some ways because one side is working within a regulated environment, right? So there had to be a little bit of a division there because it's like what they were doing and what the crypto side were doing were very different from both a regulatory point of view and a marketing point of view. You go back to the early days and banks didn't want to go anywhere near crypto, right? They didn't want to touch the stuff. So Ripple's kind of strategy of kind of getting a foot in the door with RippleNet was I think pretty good, in that they could kind of get in there, get known to the client, work with them, and then kind of say, well, by the way, if you want to get into crypto, there's this other side of the business and the service we can offer.
Was there a feeling early on, just within the broader Ripple company, about kind of taking on the banking establishment and that would being a kind of intimidating task?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think this is the weird thing is like originally, I mean, if you go back right to the early days of like Chris Larsen, I mean, Chris Larsen originally created one of the first peer-to-peer lending markets, right? Prosper, and I can't remember what the e-loans, I can't remember the name of the company now, but he took on the SEC right very early on, right, in a previous company, because the SEC alleged that this whole what would now we would call DeFi, right? This was before cryptocurrencies even existed, but this was peer-to-peer lending between people that they were not that happy with, right? Because the SEC were like, well, how do we regulate this? What's it regulated as, et cetera, et cetera. And so Chris Larsen went toe-to-toe with the SEC. I believe they settled. I can't remember the exact specifics, but I believe they came to some settlement. But, so from the early days, Ripple were kind of taking on the market. But then with the FinCEN situation. So FinCEN in 2015, I think it was, FinCEN kind of slapped Ripple on the wrist and said, you are selling an unlicensed, you are acting as an unlicensed money service bureau. You are handling I can't remember the exact words, but basically virtual currency. And so they deemed it a virtual currency and slapped Ripple on the wrist for not having a money service bureau license. I mean, this is where the absurdity of the regulation in the US comes down, because they're like, okay, we've got one regulator saying, slapping you on the wrist for selling something as a currency, and then you've got another one slapping you on the wrist for claiming, for alleging that you're selling a unlicensed security. And it's kind of like, actually, technically, both of those things can be true, but it just makes no sense, that's the situation, right? So it is a bit weird. But that FinCEN agreement, as a part of that, Ripple had to agree to shut down their web wallet. They had a system called Ripple Trade that was a web-based wallet. They had to shut that down. They had to try and KYC a bunch of customers, existing customers, which was very difficult to do, because you've got all of these customers, you don't know who they are, and then you're trying to KYC them after the fact is very difficult. And then they had to stop selling XRP to retail. So this kind of started, I think, the whole pivot with Ripple towards aiming directly towards, the financial institutions themselves, rather than aiming towards the individuals, right? So they were kind of moving up the food chain, I suppose, and making the likes of the remittance companies that we now see as their customers, having them as their customers rather than competing with them.
Interesting. Cool. Thank you for that background. You filled in a bunch of gaps for me. All right, let's hop over to tokenization, because I know that's what people are interested for us to kind of get into this idea. And if you aren't familiar with what I'm talking about, one of the models that the committee that I'm working on has put out is a collateralization model to value XRP in a simulated scenario. We're kind of pretending had the lawsuit never happened and XRP adoption had continued as it was intended. What would the value have been in 2030? And then we kind of net present value back to today. So there was brought up a lot of questions about it. So let's just dive into, how do you explain the idea of tokenization to people so we can kind of get on the same page?
Right. So the XRP ledger was the first blockchain that allowed tokenization, right? Back from when it first went live in 2012, 2013, it was the first blockchain that had tokenization. Now, bear in mind that the only other blockchain at the time was Bitcoin. Litecoin came out about the same time, and that was a fork of Bitcoin. So basically did exactly what Bitcoin did, just slightly different. But the XRP ledger was completely new. And one of the key features it had was the ability to tokenize other assets. Now, at the time, the terminology tokenization and tokens didn't even really exist. So the XRP ledger borrowed the terminology from the financial world, and it calls them IOUs. And that gives you some kind of insight into how they work. So when you tokenize something on the blockchain, what you are doing is you're creating an IOU that represents that asset. So in the early days, there were a couple of providers of gold on the XRP ledger. They tokenized gold. So there's a company called SBG, I believe it was, another one called GBI, based in, I can't remember where, somewhere in Eastern Europe. And they tokenized gold. And they had an XAU token on the XRP ledger, and you could buy and sell XAU. And for me, actually, that was the way I got into buying XRP. When I first went to buy some XRP, was I actually went to their website, used my debit card, bought some gold off of this gold seller that was delivered to me as an IOU on the XRP ledger, and I then sold that for XRP to get XRP. So, but the key point is that with tokenization, the token is an IOU that represents some other value off the chain, right? So with tokenized gold, one XAU token might represent 1 gram of gold stored in a safe somewhere, right? In a vault somewhere. And so the token in and of itself does not have any value, but it represents the value of some other asset that is off chain. And it might, or might be on another blockchain. So for example, Bitcoin, you can tokenize Bitcoin on the XRP ledger, and that means that one BTC token you have on the XRP ledger is in theory redeemable for 1 real Bitcoin by the issuer, right? And this is the key point, is you have an issuer that issues this IOU. So in the case of gold, like I said, there was a company in, I think it was Slovenia, and that company in Slovenia, they issued the token, and in return, they held the gold on your behalf. So the idea about tokenization is you are creating effectively an IOU for that asset, and that is what is on the ledger. And you can trade that IOU. So if I have that IOU and I send it to you, then you now have that IOU, and you could go and redeem it for that, whatever. If it's worth 1 gram of gold, I send it to you, you can now redeem it for 1 gram of gold, right? That's where the value is. And you can go and sell it, to somebody else or trade it or whatever.
I sometimes use the analogy of poker chips, just trying to explain that. Would you think that would be accurate?
Yes, it is. Yeah, so it is accurate in that so if you take something like a poker chip, now a poker chip is, made of plastic. The poker chip on itself, has $100 written on it, and it's an IOU for $100. But the plastic in the poker chip in and of itself intrinsically is not worth $100. And actually, I mean, so are banknotes in many cases, right? A paper banknote says $100 on it. That's not $100 worth of paper. That is an IOU. And originally, it was literally an IOU for $100 worth of gold. It says, I promise to pay the bearer, or whatever the wording was, the equivalent of gold. When countries were on the gold standard, that was what the banknotes originally were. Now, so with tokenization, the token represents, some other asset. You then have native tokens. So you have the native token of the XRP ledger, which is XRP. And XRP doesn't have an issuer in the financial sense. It doesn't have a counterparty. That XRP is not an IOU for something else, right? That XRP has value in and of itself, and it's a kind of a perceived value. It's a value that you and I kind of ascribe to it based upon its utility and its scarcity and those kind of things. But it's a value that we ascribe to it in the same way that, say, gold, an ounce of gold is worth a certain amount, and that is because we deem it to be worth that value, right?
Does a token issued on a ledger like XRP Ledger, does it have to have an underlying asset, or can I just make a token and say, this is Molly's token and it's based on my ideas or something?
You can do that too. And that's where, so especially, in the last couple of years, there's been a rise of the kind of like the meme tokens and things like that. That's where they come into play, right? So that's what they are. You can create a Molly token and you can say, hey, this Molly token is worth $100. And, the only thing that backs that up is you say it's worth $100, right? So, there's no like asset that is backing that up, right? And that is where, so you've got the native asset that has no backing behind it, but is valued based, and it has some intrinsic value in and of itself. You have the IOUs whose value is derived from the asset that they are being backed by. And you've kind of got in the middle this kind of gray area of the things like meme tokens, that are neither, but for some reason have some value, right? Yeah, because Elon Musk tweeted something and there we go, right?
Well, we have that in the physical world. Like, I use the analogy of you could have two pairs of jeans. One is like some Walmart jeans and another one is some luxury designer jeans. Intrinsic value based on the ingredients, materials cost is the same, but I have decided if I'm selling the luxury jeans that these are worth X, and you can decide to pay me for them or not, but I've now set that value as the seller.
Right.
Can that happen can that happen with tokens too? Can I just be the issuer and say we're going to sell it for $10,000?
Sure. And the XRP ledger has a built-in decentralized exchange that allows you to put that sell order on there. So you can go to the decentralized exchange and you can say one gene token is $100. And it's up to somebody if they want to buy it or not, right? So they can choose to buy it or not. Now, because it's an open exchange, I could choose to buy your gene token for $100. I could, it's perfectly within my rights to then turn around and sell it for $50, right? Okay, I make a $50 loss, but there's nothing to stop me selling that for whatever price I deem is right. I could buy it off you and say, hey, I'm selling it for $200, right? Now, somebody might say, well, why would I buy it off of, Matt for $200 when I could buy it off of Molly for $100? And then it probably comes down to things like scarcity, right? So if you're only willing to sell 5 tokens because you only got 5 pairs of jeans, and you only want to sell them for 5, and hey, I've got 5, and somebody wants to buy 10, then they got to buy your 5 and buy my 5, and they pay your price and they pay my price, right? Because that's kind of, if you look at order books, cryptocurrency order books or FX market order books, that's what happens. You start buying up through the order book and the price gets more expensive the more you are buying, and that's what ultimately moves the price up, right? And conversely, when you sell, the more you sell, the cheaper it goes, and that pushes the price down.
It can sometimes be a convenience or lack of knowledge. Like, I go to the gas station, a bottle of water is $1, and I go to the airport where it's now $6, same product, but the circumstances are different. can't that happen with digital assets too? That I just don't know where the cheap price is, so I buy it wherever I see it?
They can do to a degree. They can do to a degree, but nowhere near to that level because digital assets are global. They're tradable. They're,
Okay.
wherever. So, the difference between your bottle of water in a gas station and your bottle of water in a desert is you're stuck in a desert, right?
Okay.
Now, you can't get out of that desert easily. I mean, if you could just click your fingers and be at the gas station, you would have bought it for $1, right? Why would you buy it for $6 in the desert if you could just, click your heels, your ruby slippers, and suddenly you're back at the gas station and you can buy it for $1? Well, with digital assets like the XRP ledger, you can do that, right? I mean, if I've got a market buying and selling them, I'm based here in Barbados. If I've got a market saying I'm willing to, whatever, sell XRP for $5, and you're willing to, sell it for $1, then why would they buy it off of me when they could equally buy it off of you? The XRP ledger is decentralized. Barbados is no closer to them than where you are because it's all global, right? It's all interconnected. Right. The XRP ledger doesn't have a central point. So
let's say let's say you did something like RippleNet. You and your friends create a private ledger and you're like, hey, you know what? We like to play poker. And when we settle up our bets at the end of the night, we're going to pay each other in XRP. And just to keep things simple, in our private poker room, we're going to value XRP at $10,000 a token. And we're just going to exchange value that way in this closed system. Like, is that a technical issue from your perspective?
So, I mean, that's fine. You can do that within your closed network, but that only works within your closed network. Because so, at the end of the day, I've got 1 XRP from our poker game, and we've said that we're at 10,000, right?
Yeah.
What can I do with that? I can't sell it to anybody else because nobody else is going to buy that 1 XRP for 10,000 because they can buy it from somewhere else for 50 cents or 40 cents, whatever it is now, right? So why would they buy? Because XRP is fungible. Because 1 XRP is exactly the same as any other XRP. There's no reason to buy my XRP. It's not special, right? It's not even within XRP. It's not even like you can see like a history or anything. It's not like, oh, because Matt owned it, it's worth more or anything, right? There's nothing even like that. Whereas your jeans, you could say, well, those jeans were worn by Beyonce, so they're going to be, worth more because they've got a history to them, and maybe somebody's willing to pay a premium for a collector's item, even beyond the price of the denim, right? They're going to pay because they were worn by somebody, or they were in this show, or they were, signed by somebody, or whatever it might be, right?
Okay.
So within your poker room, okay, you can say that the XRP are worth 10,000, but that is meaningless on the open market because you can't sell that XRP for 10,000 because nobody's going to buy it for 10,000. Right. And if they would do, then what would happen is immediately all your poker buddies would go and sell it for 10,000 on the open market because they suddenly get rich. Right. And in doing so, they sell their XRP. It's not a huge amount of XRP compared to the rest of the market, so it probably wouldn't move the market that much. They get a chunk of money. But again, who's going to buy $10,000 XRP when they can buy it for 40 cents?
So this has come up just in a hypothetical, if you had nations doing trade in a closed marketplace. Like, let's just say the BRICS countries, if these 6 or 7 countries just decided we're going to have a private network to trade and we're swapping oil and corn and whatever, we're just going to use XRP. It's easier for them if XRP is high value because they don't have to send as many. And if they don't ever care about moving it out of the ecosystem, this is purely a trade thing. This is where I think the question has come up around, could the value be different if you had a bunch of these private networks?
Okay, so potentially, but there's two problems with that kind of scenario. One is you would have to ensure that there is no connection to the outside world, right? With that, because the instant that somebody can go and sell that 10,000 XRP on the open market and get 10,000 for it, they're going to do it, right? What's going to stop them, right? Why would I?
You mean somebody from outside can't get in?
Well, somebody from inside this network can't sell it to the outside, right?
Outside it's worth less. Inside is where it's worth 10 grand.
Right. Okay, exactly. Right. But so it's only worth 10 grand inside. So, okay. So yes, putting it the other way around, you could say, why wouldn't somebody from the outside come and sell their XRP that they bought for 40 cents in the network and end up selling it for, $10,000, right? Now, Again, the reason being is if they're selling it for $10,000 and it's valued at $10,000 within the network, then that's nothing special, right? Anybody can buy from $10,000 from anyone else. So you're not really doing anything there. But if suddenly you had this massive flow of XRP coming in, cheap XRP coming in to be sold, it will bring the price down, right? This is what arbitrage is, right? Arbitrage, and this is why, because what some people want to realize is that when they talk about the private ledgers, and I'm one of the most vocal people that says that there isn't a private ledger, the whole idea is crazy, and that's because a lot of people are kind of thinking of them as this like some secret cabal nefarious thing that's there, where there's some magic XRP and unicorn land that they can get for some elevated price, right, or sell for some elevated price. But the forces of arbitrage will equal that. And when you realize that every single centralized exchange is a private ledger, right? So Coinbase is a private ledger. They have within Coinbase, Matt owns this much, Molly owns this much, Bob owns this much, whatever, within Coinbase. Binance is a private ledger. Bitstamp is a private ledger. Bitrue is a private ledger, right? Every single marketplace is a private ledger. And you might look on there and you might see, okay, well, the price is ever so slightly different. It might be a cent higher or half a cent higher on one exchange versus another exchange. But they're kept in price by the act of arbitrage, because as soon as the price goes up on one, somebody will sell it. And that act of selling it will cause the price to come down again, because there's a glut in the market. As they sell it, the price comes down. So arbitrage causes this self-balancing to happen between these separate networks. So the only way in which you can maintain a price discrepancy is if you literally have some kind of block and you say, well, you can't move XRP across this. Right?
What if one's for institutional traders only? Like there's a bond project out of Singapore that was testing DeFi for institutional bond trading. I'm not going to be allowed in. I'm not a bond trader or an institutional anything. So that is a walled garden where maybe I need an NFT to get into this DeFi marketplace. And the price of these bonds could be quite different than some other place where I could buy bonds because it's for a different market.
Right. But again, it comes down to, so again, XRP, one, it's fungible. Two, it's global and on a public network. Right. So it's not like a private bond like marketplace. It exists on this public network. So the only way you could do this with XRP is if you created a network and literally did not allow any XRP to be traded across the boundary between that private network and the public network. In doing so, you've effectively created something that is no longer XRP. Right. It's kind of like if we're both selling whatever, if we're both selling apples and one of us decides that actually we're going to call these oranges, if we all agree that they're oranges, then they're oranges, right? I mean, as long as none of us kind of look over the fence and go, wait a minute, that's not an orange, that's an apple, then we can believe whatever we want, as long as you keep that in a private, totally, isolated network. Now, again, cryptocurrencies are global. And if you then go down to the theory of, well, XRP is going to be used globally, then that whole market, you can't have those walls. Right.
But is it RippleNet? Didn't you say that's sort of a walled garden for banks? Does money move out?
It is, but RippleNet doesn't have a token. RippleNet doesn't use XRP. Right. RippleNet is a payment network. It's a payment messaging network mainly for fiat currencies. So RippleNet is kind of similar to Swift. It doesn't do settlement in and of itself, apart from it can do with XRP, but the majority of the use is in fiat. So it's one financial institution sending a message over RippleNet to another financial institution saying, Matt pays Molly $100, right?
So ODL is not part of that?
Not in its basic sense, no. So as it starts off, it says, Matt pays Molly $100. Now we've made that payment, but we've got to settle the payment. Now, typically you have what are called Nostro and Vostro accounts at each end, and my bank will hold an account at your bank and will transfer the funds from the bank's account to the personal account or whatever, whichever way around, and basically settle the payment. Now, ODL allows you to do that effectively with XRP. So when I send you some money, and this works especially well for cross-border payments with different currencies, I want to sell you $100, or I want to send you $100. That's 200 Barbados dollars where I am. The 200 Barbados dollars gets converted to however much XRP that would be. The XRP is sent to you. Your bank then sells that XRP for US dollars and delivers the US dollars to you, right? And that's what ODL does on demand liquidity. And that
doesn't that mean RippleNet is essentially using XRP via ODL?
So they are they are effectively instructing payments to happen on the XRP ledger, right? And so if you look at someone like, there's a few of the ODL tracker type websites that try to analyze the XRP ledger to kind of see what payments are going on ODL. They can kind of get a bit of a flavor for that. But XRP itself does not travel across RippleNet, right? RippleNet is completely separate.
So back to that ODL example you just gave, where I have $100 US, you have $200 Barbados, and this transaction happens. It basically happens as two mini transactions, right? First, it swaps from my 100 to whatever, then it swaps to yours. So would you say that both of those values are essentially derivatives of XRP based on what the exchange rate is that day?
Well, the thing being is because because both a buy and a sell is happening, it effectively equals out in the market on a global sense, right? There might be some regional differences if the flows are, say all of the flow is going from Barbados to the US, then that would mean there'd be a lot of buy pressure for XRP in Barbados and a lot of sell pressure for XRP in the US. So that means the price of XRP in Barbados locally would go up. The price of XRP in the US would go down. Now, arbitrageurs, again, would see that. And so they would say, well, hey, I can buy XRP cheap in the US and I can sell it in Barbados and make a profit because it's 10% higher there. So they would buy it in the US and sell it in Barbados. And that causes the price to then come back again because the buy pressure in the US causes the price to go up and the sell pressure in Barbados causes the price to go down. So they even out again, right? So arbitrageurs working in this background cause these the prices to effectively equalize because they're a kind of a balancing pressure to things that are happening like ODL going on there. But the actual value of XRP is not really that important for that transaction, right? Because say I'm sending you, $100 US worth, and if XRP is $1, then I need 100 XRP to make that transaction, right? So my 200 Barbados dollars buys 100 XRP, sends it to the US, and is sold for 100 US dollars, right? Now, if XRP is worth $10, then instead of buying 100, I only need to buy 10, sell 10. But it actually is no different buying 100 than buying 10, right? The only difference might be is that if I'm looking to send you $1 billion, that I need to buy $1 billion worth of XRP, and that might not be necessarily available on the local market and would push the price up quite a bit, right? So the kind of the actual movement backwards and forwards might increase the value because as well, if I want to buy it, somebody needs to be selling it. And if nobody wants to sell because they're all holding on because when moon, right, then how am I going to buy it, right? So the more I want to buy, the higher the price is going to go up, for example. But then, like I said, at the end of the transaction, it's sold, so that could push the price down again. So it actually balances out. So ODL in and of itself is effectively price neutral from the buying and selling sense, but it increases the overall volume on the network. And for a start, you have fees to pay in XRP, which are minuscule, so that's not really that that much of an issue. But again, it's just about the demand for that XRP during that transaction. And that is where kind of the value starts to come around, right? If everybody's doing these transactions, then you're going to need more XRP around to do that. And so it's going to start to become more valuable because it is, effectively scarcer relative to, its usage.
Now, let's say hypothetically that the derivatives markets moved on to the XRP ledger, and now you have these agreements that may be executed in the future. Does XRP need to be allocated aside to enable those transactions so you don't go to fulfill the contract and there isn't enough?
Potentially. So that depends upon, so if you look at things like EFTs and stuff like that, you have physical EFTs and you have paper EFTs, right? So I'm not a financial expert here, so I might have got the wording on this slightly wrong. But for example, on a physical EFT, then the fund has to hold the actual asset to back that up, right? So if I have a fund that's worth, $1 million worth of XRP, I have to have $1 million worth of XRP sat, in an account that I control in order to back that up, right? Not all EFTs are structured the same way. You've probably heard there's been a lot around Bitcoin EFTs and about whether or not they're allowed and this, that, and the other. There are XRP derivative products. I mean, even CoinShares, which funnily enough is Meltem Demers, who's a big Bitcoin maximalist. Her company offers a physically traded XRP. It's not. I think it's EFT. I can't remember exactly. There's a slight change in one of the letters that means something that I don't fully understand on the financial level. But it's a fund that is denominated in XRP, and I believe they have to physically hold the XRP for that fund.
My understanding of the futures market is that if I agree to buy something from you in the future at a specific price, you've got to make sure that you have that. So if when time comes, you can't be like, oops, I spent it on something else. And so the futures market, would that require then to pull XRP out of the available supply for those transactions?
But potentially, yes, potentially it would do. And again, that comes down to the regulatory kind of things that surround that. I mean, because what you've described is you must hold it. Well, that's a regulation, right? If you say you must hold the XRP to back that, that's a regulatory thing. That's a legal requirement or regulatory requirement. And again, there's a question of, well, which regulatory regime are we in? Is that a US offered product and subject to US regulation, or is this a Singaporean product and under Singaporean regulation, or European or whatever? So couldn't
even just be agreement though. Like, I'm not going to futures trade with you if the one time I do it, you spent the stuff. So you kind of get kicked out of the market, right? If you're not going to honor the rules of that world.
Maybe, but I mean, that's you're just kind of trusting that they don't there. And I mean, what's that based on? A handshake and a note from your mom? I mean, it's things probably need to be a little more a little stricter than that. Now, this is where things like DeFi come in, because you can have DeFi futures markets in which things have to be locked up in a smart contract, and we can both verify that. Okay, I have put a million XRP into this smart contract, and it will release on this date at this value, and you've put a futures, you've put a put on that or whatever, and it could release it automatically on some particular time for some particular price. That could be possible, and that's where DeFi comes in, because it takes these handwritten laws and puts them in actual code that executes on the blockchain.
So this is an interesting technical question for you. So let's say I buy a futures contract on XRP diamonds, tokenized diamonds that are on the blockchain. And this futures contract, let's just say, I'm making it up, it has like $100 million worth of value. I will buy these diamond tokens from you for $100 million on a certain date if that's a certain condition is met. Now, in order for that transaction to work, it's going to have to go through XRP. So does XRP need to be held aside for that futures contract to make sure when it's time, there is the value there to support that exchange?
I mean, not necessarily, right? Because so you've tokenized these diamonds or whatever, and that's a totally separate value to XRP, right? Because the value of that is in the diamonds, is not in the XRP. Now, I can sell you to that any different way, right? I can just transfer those tokens to you and say, hey, Molly, there you go. There's $1 million worth of diamond tokens. You just send me a yacht in return or something, right?
Well, let's say we're doing it on like an exchange like ODL, where everything goes through XRP.
Right. So like I said, so ODL is used mainly for kind of cross-border payments and that sort of things. But if they had some asset on one end and they needed to transfer that to somewhere else, and they wanted to use something like ODL, then at that point in time, the ODL markets would need to be able to supply the amount of XRP that's needed. But that's only if you're doing like an ODL type transaction. You don't have to do that, right? We can settle this transaction any other way. I can trade my tokenized diamonds for tokenized US dollar on the XRP ledger without using XRP at all, right?
Okay.
And
then don't you need a trading pair for everything? If
right.
that's
So right. And that's where XRP comes in. You've possibly seen that diagram where it's like XRP in the middle and a bunch of assets around the outside. And that's the idea, is that, you know, because if we were trying to trade diamonds with US dollars, for example, then on the XRP ledger, on the decentralized exchange order book, you'd need an order on there that says, I want to buy X amount of diamonds for X amount of Y amount of US dollars, right? And then if somebody else wants to do it with pound sterling, then you'd have to have one for diamonds to pound sterling. If somebody wants to do it with yen, diamonds to yen, right? So you end up with lots of different pairs there. Whereas instead, if it's all just diamonds to XRP, and then everybody makes their value of US dollars to XRP, pound sterling, Japanese yen, or whatever to XRP, then that makes that a lot easier. And the XRP ledger will synthesize the two order books, so US dollars to XRP and XRP to diamonds, and synthesize them and give you what looks like a US dollar to diamond order book, but it's actually synthetic, composed of those two trades there.
So let's just say that the world moves to this one marketplace. XRP is the currency that eliminates the need for all these trading pairs. Everything goes through XRP. Does that mean at the end of the day that everything is being bought and sold and priced in XRP?
But well, it's not necessarily being priced in that. It's being priced in whatever you want to price it in, but it might go via XRP, part of that, right? So, you know, I can actually say, you know, this pair of shoes is priced at 8 bananas, right? And you know, it doesn't matter. That was the whole point of the XRP ledger originally, was you could trade any value for any value. And the XRP ledger DEX effectively takes care of it and uses XRP internally as a bridge for that. So if you have all these tokenized assets, then the usage of XRP would increase as a point of this. But having $1 million worth of diamonds and $1 million worth of whatever bananas doesn't mean that the value of XRP has to go up $1 million or $2 million because you've got, you know, $2 million worth of assets, right? So, and that's where one of my criticisms of the first valuation you put out seemed to be, we tokenize everything and then we divide it by the number of XRP in circulation, and that's just incorrect, because the value of XRP is independent of the tokenized assets, right? It will hopefully go up in value as a result of the trading and the usage, but just by virtue of there being tokens and tokenized value doesn't mean that the value of XRP is that value.
I mean, these models are simulations, are full of assumptions. And one of the assumptions was kind of related to what I just said. If every trading exchange goes through XRP, things are going to be fundamentally bought and sold in XRP, meaning they're going to be fundamentally priced in XRP. We want to make sure there's enough value available on the global exchange to cover all of the assets that are represented on there. And that was just kind of one of the assumptions of using collateral for a loan. That's where that came from. Right.
But I mean, for that assumption to work there, what you're saying is, one, all of the value in the world, and I kind of jokingly said, you know, that includes the tanks and the planes of the Department of Defense, right? All of that is tokenized, right? We've tokenized everything in the world, and then you are instantaneously transacting all of that in one instant. And then secondly, well, that doesn't really work, because if all the value is on one side of that trade, you haven't got anything to buy that value with, right? So you could only transact half of that, because half of it has to be used to buy the other half, right? So at the very least, you're 2 times high, because you can't, if you've encoded all of that value, you can't sell everything in the world instantaneously, because what are you going to buy it with? Right. Because you've tokenized everything, you're selling everything, right? So, but again, like I said, the assumption in that report is, 1, you've tokenized everything in the world. 2, you've attempted to sell absolutely everything in one instant. And you know, it's just ludicrous, right? I know it's a model there, and I know it's an assumption, but it's kind of like the assumption of saying, well, you know, I can fly to the moon because I can jump in the air, and maybe I'll be able to jump in the air and reach the moon. It's like, no, I can't, right? I can jump half a meter in the air. That's it. I'm not going to get to the moon. So, you know, I think that's people read those valuations and go, oh, well, it could be $150,000 or whatever, $135,000 per XRP. And I think that's where, you know, my personal kind of criticism of that comes in, because it's just not feasible, right? It's just not
just
feasible.
to give you a counter is, one, it's intended to be an extreme scenario, like a worst or best case scenario, in the event there was ever a class action lawsuit. So they're like, we have to look at, you know, if you, I think use this analogy, if you cut my hand off and I'm some surgeon and I'm going to sue you, I'm going to calculate how much money could I have made in like a best case scenario to assess those damages. Then the other idea with the collateralization model is that it doesn't assume it just has to cover what's being transacted at that time, because of this argument around futures agreements, that if everything is essentially being bought and sold in a derivative of XRP, all of that value needs to be available at any time, should it be transacted.
Right, but that's only if you're transacting all 100% of that at that instant, which again is just the probability of that is you know, virtually zero. But the argument you make about the surgeon and losing his hand, so that's an interesting one, right? So what you're saying is, what would the value of you know, my earnings be if I hadn't have lost my hand as a surgeon, right? That's I think a perfectly valid kind of thing to try and calculate, right? However, I think what's being calculated in that model is, you know, starting from me not necessarily being a surgeon yet, me being in med school or whatever, and saying, okay, if I cut my hand off now, what would my earnings be if I were to become a surgeon, if I were to publish that paper that makes me famous, that then gets me, and then I get this Hollywood contract to do plastic surgery to all these A-lifts, whatever it might be, or cure cancer or whatever, right?
Okay.
You're making so many steps there, and any kind of, like, I see what you're saying in that, okay, this is meant to be a worst case scenario to defend against the government coming and buying it back and yada, yada, yada. You know, any kind of like eminent domain type argument, which is what will come about from, like, you know, the government wants to buy your house because they're going to put a highway through it, right? And they come to you, they say, we want to buy your house. We're going to offer you 100,000, and you turn around and say, well, no, actually, it should be worth more, right? A judge is going to look at kind of the appraisal methodologies and look and see if they're reasonable. Now, if you're coming in and saying, well, I'm basing this based upon the fact that all of the value in the world is going to be transacted, and it's all going to be transacted instantaneously, the judge is going to laugh at you, right? They're just going to say that is just completely, you know, irresponsible. It's inappropriate. It's not gonna happen. And then they're going to look down at the methodology, and they're going to say, well, you've assumed the price of XRP is the same price as the tokenized assets. You've not taken into account that you can only trade half of it at one go. So, you know, your methodology is inaccurate. So at the end of the day, you know, it's going to be thrown out, right? So, you know, I understand what you're saying about trying to come up with some sort of appraisal method. My personal view, I've made this quite clear, is I don't think it's ever going to happen that the US government's going to buy back XRP. But even if it does happen, I think the valuation, you are one, conflating tokenized assets with the native asset, in which there's a very big, you know, difference, and two, you are looking at future speculative value that hasn't yet happened, right? If you look at the valuation model, you're probably familiar with the model that Robert Mitchnick and Susan yeah, so that was 2018, I think it was, end of 2018, middle 2018. So they did a valuation. Susan Athey was on the board of directors of Ripple. She's a university lecturer, I think, I can't remember exactly, and created a model in which they were looking at what would the future value of XRP potentially be, right?
Correct.
But they looked at, okay, how much of it would be used, and they came up with a couple of like scenarios, and they're like, okay, it's going to be between whatever 30 and 70% might be used for retail, 15 to whatever 50% going to be for corporate payments, 1 or 2% in FX trading, and worked it out based upon that. And they worked out, okay, the XRP could be reused multiple times a day, blah, 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 blah. And they came out with a valuation of, I think it was between like like $1.50 and $8 or something like that, right? For their valuation. So, and that to me sounds reasonable, right? You can say, okay, the numbers are a little higher, a little lower, whatever, but the sounding seems reasonable. And that was 2018, and they came back with a price of Bitcoin that's, I think, about accurate now. I think they said Bitcoin was going to be about $15,000 to $30,000, something like that in their paper. and Bitcoin's at 22 or whatever, so it's about in the middle of that, right? So you could possibly go to a judge and say, well, this was an appraisal we did before, and we reckon it's between $1.50 and $8.50, and because of the SEC lawsuit, that's kept it down. And so we think instead of, if you were to buy it back, instead of buying it back at 40 cents, you should buy it back at a couple of dollars. That I could think they would say, okay, that's reasonable. Yes, we'll go for that. But to go from a couple of dollars up to $135,000, that's fantastical.
One of our models is actually based on the Anthony Michnik model. So we have kind of an updated version. I mean, the big variable in that model, however, is the amount of value being moved. And the number they used is much, much lower than what we are using. And this idea of all the money, actually nobody in the committee came up with that. There's a Ripple employee on video. I'm gonna put the clips in this for you guys, who talked about how the goal was the total addressable market size was all the money. And that's where that came from, that was a Ripple goal to tokenize everything. And that model was addressing that scenario of if Ripple had gotten what they had intended and all of the money was tokenized, what would this valuation have been?
Right, and fair enough. I imagine that may have been said in a very colloquial sense, not in a literal create a model of it sense. But again, it's not happened now, right? And creating a model that says, okay, this is what XRP should be worth. Had the SEC case not happened, which is, from what I understand, one of the goals of the model, the other is the buyback type thing. They're two different things. If you're trying to come up with a fair market value, you have to look at what the value would be now, right? Had it not have been for, right? Or had we known about, right? So the fair market value is based on everybody being, knowledgeable of the facts, and there may be some facts that we don't know about, right? And that could affect the price. But that's at this point in time. You can't create a fair market value model and say, well, in 10 years' time, we're going to have tokenized the entire planet. That's not a fair market value model, because fair market value is based upon what the market is now and what we may have missed out on as a result of certain actions like the SEC case or not knowing what a certain entity is doing.
Let me ask you a question as a developer. Do you think that there are fewer projects on the XRP ledger than there would have been if the SEC lawsuit hadn't happened?
I believe so. Yeah, I believe so. Because one of the big, one of the big things is a lot of people are saying, well, we're going to hold off because we don't know what the regulatory certainty is. And what's interesting is, I now work at Protocol Labs working on Filecoin, and Filecoin is a blockchain all to do with storage, right? And they've got a token, the FIL token, and the FIL token is used to buy and sell effectively storage capacity on the network, and is used, for underwriting that, right? And the difference in the market based upon the marketplace, the ecosystem, rather, sorry, not market, the ecosystem of developers and development companies on, say, Filecoin versus the XRP ledger is massively different. And the reason being is that storage is not a regulated industry, right? Whereas payments is, right? If I want to set up a payment company on the XRP ledger or do something with payments, I need to have a license to do so. And that just immediately reduces the speed at which I can get to market. I tried to, way back in early 2018, I created a prototype. It was called Throw a Stone. The play was, well, how do you get ripples? Because somebody kept saying to me, oh, I want to buy some ripples, right? Oh, there's XRP, yeah, I want to buy some. How do I get it? And I was like, how do you get ripples? Throw a stone into a pond, right? So we codenamed this project Throw a Stone, and it was a direct connection between the UK banking, the faster payments network, and the XRP ledger. And it allowed you to make a payment with your standard online banking, and it would turn up in XRP 10 seconds later in your wallet. Now, in order to get that to work, we needed a banking partner. We went around to all the different banking providers in the UK that we could find, I think about 7 or 8 of them. And they basically slammed the door in my face and said, no, we're not going to do that. And at the time, I mean, their saying was literally, we don't deal with Bitcoin, porn, or gambling. And that and slammed the door in my face. I was like, but, and they're like, yeah, no, bye, right? And that was they were that adverse to anything to do with cryptocurrencies or blockchain. And you fast forward now, so that was 2018. You fast forward to now 4 or 5 years, and you see what XRPL Labs has created in Europe, and they've got their on-ramp with some Pro that allows you to do pretty much what we were trying to do, I was trying to do back then. But it's taken 5 years to get everything in. I mean, they haven't been working on it for 5 years, but it's taken 5 years for the banking and the regulatory industry to get to that point where they'd even be happy to even consider it. And even then, I'm sure Vitsa's had a lot of, sleepless nights working out how to, make this happen. Whereas with storage and what's happening with Filecoin, there's none of that worry. So I can set up a company doing storage stuff and storing NFTs or data or scientific data or census data or medical data, whatever. And there's no medical data is HIPAA, but ignoring that, there's no regulatory thing around storage of data. So the ecosystem has grown massively as a result of that. So if you kind of take that and say, well, what would it look like had the SEC not happened? Then yes, I think the ecosystem would have grown a lot bigger had the SEC case not happened. Yeah.
So let's just say I was an attorney and I have tons of XRP holders who are mad. We're going to sue the SEC, and you're out of work and you're good at analytical things. And I say, Matt, I need you to figure out how to quantify the harm that this lawsuit caused on XRP. Like, where would you start with that?
I'd probably go back and start with something like, the Michnik and valuation, reassess that and say, how did that work out? What are the values? What are the current values at the moment? What is realistic to expect? So they reckon it'd be 35 to 70% or whatever it was, retail remittances. Well, we're clearly not near that now. But what is the total remittance market? How many RIAs, MoneyGrams, et cetera, would you need to get to that level? What do we think could have happened? MoneyGram's a good example. If MoneyGram was still working there, what would that have been like, right? So I think, that's where I'd probably start looking at. Yeah.
And then how do you even estimate the projects that could have happened on the XRP ledger that didn't, and the value they would have had? I mean, how do you do that?
It's near impossible. Again, goes back to right at the very start. I said, as a developer advocate, it's very difficult because you don't know who's building what, right? Until they suddenly come out, right? So there was one of the projects, I can't remember what they're called now. So not 3XY or something like that are on the XRP ledger that suddenly popped out of nowhere and said, "Oh, we're doing this." And I was like, "Oh, wow, cool." I've got no idea who you are or what you're doing. That's great, right? So there's these projects that are out there that, yes, we don't even know about. So it's very difficult to try and, quantify them and work out, what that would be like. And you've got the rest of the crypto industry as well, right? Everything's currently going down at the moment. We're in a bear market. Pretty much everything's tied loosely to the value of Bitcoin and what Bitcoin does on a 4-year cycle. Then you've got the macroeconomic conditions at the moment. You've got war in Ukraine, you've got Brexit, you've got turmoil in the US political scene. So there's all this kind of stuff that's causing all of these things as well. How much does that play into it, right? When we say that 100% the value is going to be on the XRP ledger, well, there's Bitcoin Maxima, they still turn around and say, well, 100% is going to be on Bitcoin. Now, I don't think either of those are correct, but it's probably going to be somewhere in the middle, right? But again, to try and come up with a valuation and assume that XRP would be the only network that would win, I think is a little bit naive. And I love XRP, right? I mean, I'm majorly invested in XRP. I'm some people say to me, well, Matt doesn't believe in XRP or whatever. No, I do. I mean, I have, substantial investments in XRP, and it makes up, the vast majority of my investment portfolio. So I'm definitely interested in XRP going up. And hey, if XRP hit $135,000, believe me, I would be over the moon. I think I'd be on the moon before that happens, right? I just don't think it's going to happen, right? I think it's that's the bit.
Well, you're a tremendous asset to the community, because anytime we have technical questions, you're such a helpful resource to answer them in easy to understand language, which is great.
Thank you. And hey, I can be prickly at times. I know that, right? And I think what's kind of come about this is that I've seen a lot of this happen before within the community. There was the XRP is going to hit 589, and there was people like 10 minutes to midnight saying, "Oh, it's going to hit 589 on the stroke of midnight." I'm like, dude, it's $1.50 now. It's not going to hit 589 in the next 10 minutes, right? That's you just don't believe enough, right? And this buyback thing started 2 years ago. Jimmy Valley started this notion. I think it was about 2, maybe longer than that, 2 years ago. And it's kind of like, it's kind of frustrating as, you know, somebody that's within the developer community to kind of see some of these valuations come out, and it's kind of like, okay, you don't seem to be, you know, understanding some of the technical underpinnings of the thing that you're valuing. And I made an analogy about, you know, a Formula One car, right? And some pundits saying, well, a Formula One car, you're going to be able to get a Formula One car can race from New York to San Francisco in 10 hours. And one saying, no, it's going to be 20 hours. And, you know, the pundits are arguing whether it's going to be 10 or 20 hours. And the mechanics are going, a Formula One engine's only going to last 1,500 miles. It's not going to get to Chicago, right? So you can be arguing, oh, well, you just don't believe enough. Yeah, you know, no, we do believe. Literally, we're working on these engines day in, day out, right? Each race, we know them very well. You know, when somebody comes along and says, well, this engine's going to get it to San Francisco because my Toyota Camry can get to San Francisco, then it's kind of like, yeah, but Toyota Camry is not a Formula One engine, right? They have different properties. So that's where a lot of the frustration comes out. And hence I can be a little bit short with people, a little bit prickly with people as a result, because it's kind of, I've seen it before, and it takes on a life of its own, right? And when we see this committee filled with predominantly YouTube, you know, people coming out and saying, oh, it's going to hit 135,000 or whatever, it's kind of like, no, come on, be real, come on. So yeah.
One thing I wanted to mention to everybody watching this is that the proposal that went to the Fed that had, I think, initially a 37.5 valuation, the Fed could have just responded and said, we have no plans for XRP. This is ridiculous. Don't ever send us anything again. And it would have ended the whole thing. But they've gotten these documents. We've had confirmation of receipt. The Kansas City Fed confirmed. Jimmy even got close to having a meeting. So it's interesting that the parties who have received these documents have chosen not to respond.
I will kind of call Occam's razor on that and say that they're just not responding because they just don't have any interest in it or know it. They've looked at it and gone, yeah, that's great, and filed it in the trash. Is my opinion. I don't think it has any real significant bearing on them. You know, and I think it's just that's the thing. And you know, a lot of people kind of look at this, you know, myself included, look at this confidential committee and kind of go, well, okay, it's confidential, which one is kind of a bit of a red flag with, you know, the entire ecosystem, you know, open ledgers, open, you know, everything's decentralized, whatever, and kind of going, well, there's a bunch of people here coming up with some strange numbers, you know, not necessarily saying, you know, who they are or how they're, you know, coming to this. And, you know, you think, okay, well, there's probably, you know, I'm guessing there's some kind of handling fee that's in this proposal they're working on. And I imagine that's probably where the committee's going, is that they're saying, well, hey, if this happens, we'll get some cut the proceeds, and that's why they're doing it, I assume. I don't know what's been.
I have no plans to make money from this. I just find it an interesting exercise, actually.
Yeah. So what is the latest status of this thing? You said something that was sent to the Fed. When was that?
So I think one was originally sent in October of 21, like a year and a half ago-ish. And then there's a newer version that, after sort of the potential collusion within the sort of ETHgate story,
right,
we're kind of curious if the SEC maybe has been up to shenanigans by forcing this conversation. It might make them show their hand. So kind of a second version is ready, but we'd like to have a more comprehensive set of models to say, hey, you know, hypothetically, if this case hadn't happened, this is the damage you could have caused. We'd like to put them up in a paper. Honestly, it's an interesting academic exercise, because we have this paper. We might, you know, share this with the wider crypto industry if people want a new set of methodologies to value these assets. Like, we're premature to know if anybody's going to care about the document, but that's sort of our approach to why we want to put it together.
Yeah.
In a comprehensive way.
Being brutally honest here, if you take that proposal that's just the valuation that's just come out, put it to the wider crypto community, I think they will laugh their asses off and come back with a lot of the same criticism that I have. And that's, you know, and that's, I guess, some of the worry is, like, you know, we're trying to get people to come into the community and build, and when they look in, they go, well, there's these, you know, crazy people that are talking about buybacks and sitting in cars with red folders and coming up with, you know, fantastical, you know, prices and saying that all of the money is going to transact instantaneously. It's just kind of, yeah, that's
I know there's this idea or this perception that these, like, YouTubers are making these. So first of all, I've been an analyst for 20 years. I've had a YouTube channel for like 2 months. So it's kind of funny that I'm now a YouTuber after all that. However, the people that are really building the model, we have a very skilled investment banker, we have accountants, theoretical mathematicians, future traders on there. Jimmy's an M&A lawyer where they did this kind of thing all the time. So these are not like YouTubers building these models. There's actually people who do this professionally. And the reason why some of those people have chosen to remain confidential is that they're in a career where they don't really want to share their participation in this because they work at an investment bank or they work in, one works for the government. Like they don't really necessarily want to share that on Twitter, their involvement.
Right.
So the committee's not confidential. Some people have just chosen to keep their participation confidential.
No, that's okay. Yeah, fair enough if they want to do that. But again, it's kind of like, okay, if you have all of these supposedly high caliber people coming up with this stuff, and then a model comes out like this that says, hey, look, we're going to tokenize everything in the world and it's all going to transact instantaneously and the value of XRP has to equal the value of a token, then that kind of points towards a fundamental like misunderstanding as to what tokenization is, right? And how things happen on the XRP ledger. And that in some ways, in my mind, makes it kind of worse that it's kind of like, okay, if you're getting all these high caliber people and they're doing this and they don't even understand what's going on, it's yeah, that doesn't seem to be helping matters in my mind, at least.
I think it's created a fantastic set of discussions around how does this work? How do you value these assets? We have 5 different models. And I know that there's criticism, which is fine. And I think my goal is at the end of this exercise, a whole lot of people are going to know a whole lot more about this topic than they would have had we never done any of it. That's my hope.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I think they possibly will do. I won't necessarily agree at the best way of going about that, but I'm sure they will know a lot more as a result of it. Yeah.
Anything else you'd like to share with our viewers about XRP Ledger or what you're working on with Filecoin or something? Leave us with some words of wisdom.
Some words of wisdom. I think just bear in mind that things move slower than you might imagine, right? There's not going to be some big bang. There's not some flick of a switch that's going to happen. Things are going to happen slowly over time with anything within this space, right? I'm working on, like I said, I'm working on Filecoin. I'm working on a thing called the FVM, the Filecoin Virtual Machine, and that's going to allow people to write smart contracts that run on top of a storage network, which opens that up to a whole, different environment. And similarly to XRP, I think that's going to demand more, generate more demand around the marketplace for the Phil token. That's going to generate an area for a lot more innovation and a lot of participants coming in. Okay. We've got an early builders program with over 100 projects building on the FVM and on the Filecoin network. And so I think that's ultimately, hopefully going to be reflected in the price of the Filecoin token as more development happens and more use cases come out of that. But it's similarly to XRP, it's not going to happen just flick of a switch overnight. Right. There's bigger forces, I think, that do that, right? That cause, you see 20% drop in 1 hour or 5 minutes because some whale has sold something or, something's come out in the press.
Are you seeing there's a lot of interest in blockchain storage for Filecoin? Is people excited about it?
Filecoin is a blockchain. It's a layer 1 blockchain, so it sits along the same sort of level as things like the XRP ledger, and it is a blockchain specifically for accounting for decentralized storage. So the Filecoin network has about, I think it's 16 exabytes of data storage capacity, which is, put in context, about 1% of the entire data center storage capacity worldwide. It's a massive network. The storage of the data itself doesn't happen on the blockchain, but the receipts for that storage, the proof of that storage happens on the blockchain. So if you're a storage provider and I'm a storage client and I say, hey, Molly, can you store this, 5 terabytes of data for me for a year? You say, yes, it'll cost you a certain amount of fill or a certain amount of token. Both you and I have to place that effectively in an escrow on a smart contract. Okay. And then every day you've got to cryptographically, your node proves that it still has my data stored to the blockchain. Okay. And you are then drip fed the fee that I have paid to store the data over that year that you are storing the data. And if for whatever reason you can't prove you've got the data because you've lost it or something's happened, then you no longer get the fee, and you also lose your collateral, your deposit you put up, your stake that you put up, and I get that, right?
Okay.
So there's a kind of, it enables this crypto economic marketplace and incentivization around storage of data.
So it's more of a payment system necessarily than storage.
Yes. So the Filecoin network is kind of dealing with the payments and not the valuation of storage, but the payments and the verification of that storage, right? And the payments are tied to the verification. So if you can't verify that you've still got the data, then you lose out on the stake that you have to put up.
Does the data get stored on the blockchain, or do you not care where it's stored?
We don't care where it's stored, and it's not stored on the blockchain because it would be far too much data to realistically store on a blockchain, because with blockchains you have the shared state of the network across all of the nodes. Again, same with the XRP ledger. Every node on the XRP ledger contains the complete state of the network. Same with the Filecoin network. So, you know, if you try to store 16 exabytes worth of data, then everybody's going to have 16 exabytes worth of storage, which you don't want. So the storage is separate and independent, but the verification of that storage is what is stored on the Filecoin network.
Super cool. That's awesome.
So yeah, that's the stuff we're working on now. But yeah, we're in a bear market now, and everybody's kind of building and building and building. Right. The Filecoin virtual machine is due to launch early March, and so I'm going to be at ETH Denver. We've got a hackathon going on at the moment with ETH Global. I'm going to be at ETH Denver as well, which is a big Ethereum conference, kind of promoting the virtual machine, because it's an Ethereum compatible virtual machine that we built. So I'll be there if anybody wants to come along and say hi.
When is that? March?
That is the end of February, start of March. I think it's the last. If you look up ETH Denver, it's the last. I haven't booked my flight yet. It's the last weekend, the last week of February and the first week of March. So I think I'm going to be there from sort of like the 27th of February to the 4th of March, off the top of my head.
Awesome. Matt, thank you so much. This was really fun. I'm really glad we got to spar it out a little bit on video, and I know that you're a busy guy, so thank you for taking the time.
No problem. Thanks for having me on, Molly.